This is lesson number 1 on the book of Ruth, the Providence of God, and we are covering chapters 1 to 4. The objective here is that God saves through His providence. The subject is humans are saved from hopelessness. We need to find out what is God's providence. What is that? The story of Ruth takes place during the times of the judges. It is the light at the end of the dark tunnel of the judges period. The book of Ruth shows us a glimmer of hope, not only for Israel, but also for all the nations of the earth. And we can read that in Ruth chapter 2 and verse 12. So let's take a look at that. Ruth chapter 2 and verse 12. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now, this is a Moabite girl, and she's basically come to the land of Israel and have taken refuge under the Israelites' God rather than a Moabite God. So, while the Israelites did evil and worshipped idols, this is the time of the judges. A pleasant story is told of a young girl who gave up everything to worship this God. It's like a fairy tale story. Here was a young girl, and she has a pleasant story in the midst of criminal lifestyles. This young girl, she was not even an Israelite girl. She was a girl from Moab. And the Lord knew about her. The Lord loved her. And as a result, she became the great-grandmother of the greatest king of Israel. She was not even an Israelite. She became the great-grandmother of King David. And as a result, she became, it's not just only the great-grandmother of King David, but more than that. The promise of the offspring was going to come from her family. She was a Moabite. And the promise of the offspring will always take us back to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. So whenever we mention the word offspring, your mind should go back to Genesis 3:15. No Israelite existed then. Now God made a promise to Abraham to give him a land and make him the father of a great nation. And that great nation we know to be the Israelites, who will be on a particular land. This land was given to no other nation on earth, by the way. It was the milk and honey land. You can read that in Genesis chapter 12, verse 2 in particular. But his promise of the offspring was for all nations. And this promise of the offspring was not limited to the Israelites. It was not like the promise of the promised land, which was very limited to only that nation. The promise of the offspring was for all nations. So now we can understand God's promise to Abraham, that I will make you the father of many nations, according to Genesis 17:4. The Israelites' rebellion of evil and idolatry brought on the Lord's curse of a famine in the land of milk and honey. God did tell the Israelites, I'm going to give you a land of milk and honey. The rivers flow down from the mountains. You don't even have to navigate them. The farms, the crops just grow. You don't have to do as much irrigation as the other nations. This is the land of milk and honey. But because of the evil and idolatry, and you can go back to Deuteronomy chapter 28 where it talks about the blessings and curses. So God was disciplining them because of their evil. And while the book of Judges records the rebellion of a nation, in Ruth we see the faithfulness of individuals and families in the midst of evil. So there's the two books, contrast them. Judges, the evil of a nation. Ruth, the faithfulness of individuals and families. But more than the faithfulness of individuals, the book of Ruth shows us the providence of God. And that's what we need to find out about this book. Greater than the faithfulness of individuals, we have the providence of God. In other words, God takes care of the situation when humans don't have a clue. So let's take a look at chapter 1. The woman from Moab. During the time of the judges, there was a famine in Israel. Because the Israelites have rebelled against Jehovah, the land produced no crops because God didn't send any rain because of their sin. They sowed the seed, but they harvested nothing. So there goes a theory: when you sow, you will reap, because the Israelites planted, but no crops grew. Their own evil turned the milk and honey land into a desert. It's just like you buy a brand new car and everything is lovely, the petrol tank is full. Give it about a year or 2 years down the road, it's not new anymore. You didn't take care of it. The tires are plain. You don't have money for petrol. Rust is starting to start because it's sitting out in the dew every morning. You don't clean it. So the milk and honey land turned into a desert because of their own sin. One man by the name of Elimelech decided to take his family across the Jordan to the land of Moab for a temporary relief from the famine. Elimelech means God is king. This is contradictory to the belief of the nation of Israel, because they didn't think of God as their king. And yet Elimelech, his name means God is king. His wife's name Naomi means sweetness or my delight, which also contradicts the belief of the Israelites. But because they lived in bad times, times of criminal activities, evil, they turned against God. Elimelech and Naomi named the two sons Mahlon and Chilion. Mahlon means sickly, and Chilion means wasting away. Elimelech died in the foreign country of Moab while they were staying there, and while Naomi was still living there, her two sons married Moabite women. There is a bit of a love story in this book as well. But within the space of 10 years, both her sons died, and she was left with the Moabite daughters-in-law. They were not a bad family. Elimelech's family were not really sinful people. So although they made some bad decisions in life, they remained true to the God of Israel. The sons did not convert to Moabite religion when they married these Moabite women. Rather, the Moabite women converted from worshipping idols to worshipping the true God of heaven and earth. So just think of, when Israel thought of God, they thought of Yahweh, which means the eternal. When anyone else in the world thought of God, they thought of the creator of heaven and earth. So keep that in mind. Eventually Naomi received the news that the Lord had come to the aid of the Israelites. This was after about 10 years, by the way. So can you imagine, like there was about 10 years of famine, 10 years of no rain. And Naomi heard that the Lord was now finally, after about 10 years, providing food for the Israelites on the promised land. So she decided to go back, to return. She told her daughters-in-law to go back to their Moabite families and remarry to avoid being widows for the rest of their lives. It takes a time like this to prove that if these daughters-in-law were converted, whether they were truly faithful to the God of Israel. Did they really submit to the God of Israel, or did they just accepted the religion because of marriage? So one of her daughters-in-law went back to her Moabite gods, but the other remained loyal to the God of Israel. And we can read that in chapter 1, verses 15 and 16. So let's take a look at that. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. And verse 16 says, but Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your gods will be my gods. See, one had a superficial faith, which no one could tell until such time like this, when she made a decision. I will go back to my old gods. But Ruth proved that her faith to the God of heaven and earth was genuine. Therefore, she stayed with Naomi. She had a reason to stay with Naomi. There was no husband. She's just a mother-in-law. So Orpah was prepared to join the Israelites and not submit to the God of Israel. So take a look at verse 10. And it says, then she kissed them and they wept aloud, and she said to her, "Go back, we will go back with you to your people." So Orpah first said to Naomi, "I'll go back with you to the Israelites." But she never said, "I'll go back and continue worshipping the God that you worship." Ruth's use of the word God, which is Elohim, shows that all the nations around the world looked at God as creator of heaven and earth, the true God, that is. But Israel looked at God as Yahweh, which is God's covenant name for them, and Yahweh means the eternal. It means self-existent and self-eternal. So Ruth put both names, Elohim and Yahweh, together to show that the God of Israel was the same God of heaven and earth. In other words, Yahweh was Elohim. This is the same God. And we can read that in verse 16 and 17. So let's take a look at it. We've read verse 16 where it says, "Your God will be my God." That's what Ruth said to her mother-in-law. And verse 17 says, "Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me." And the word for Lord there is Yahweh. And the word for God is Elohim. So you think of Elohim as creator, think of Yahweh as the eternal. It's the same God. It's not two gods. Therefore she clung to Naomi and traveled back with her to the promised land. It was her knowledge of God that determined her choices. So it's very important to have a knowledge of God to make the right choices. Lack of knowledge of God, you will make choices based on your limited understanding, which will obviously be wrong choices. So let's take a look at chapter 2, a man from Israel. In chapter 1, we saw a woman from Moab. But now look at chapter 2, a man from Israel. Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, but to a fruitless property, because no one planted in Elimelech's land, at least for 10 years. This means that they were poor, in spite of the fertility of the soil, because God had come to their aid and He sent rain, but no one planted. Remember, from the planting season to the harvest time, it takes at least about 5 to 6 months. And you could refer to the Jewish calendar on the Erdman's or the Lion's Handbook to the Bible. Being poor, Ruth decided to glean behind harvesters in someone else's field, in someone else's farm, picking up only what fell from their hands. Considering the lawless and chaotic society of the times of the judges, it would be very dangerous for a young foreign girl to be looking for food on a strange farm. So picture the situation. A foreign girl, and she's a young girl, gleaning in a strange farm. She finds some Israelite servants, and she gleans behind them. She considers herself to be below an Israelite servant. So take a look at chapter 2 and verse 13. It says, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls. I'm not even as good as one of your servant girls." This was Ruth speaking to Boaz. We must remember that Ruth chose to be in the situation. Why did she make such a choice? It's a big question. Remember, Naomi left a famine promised land and went to a fertile land in Moab. But Ruth left fertile Moab and chose to be poor in a foreign land. Why did she do that? It was a knowledge of God. It is of crucial importance. It was a knowledge of God that gave her the desire to be loyal to Him no matter what. She said, "It doesn't matter what happens. I will not let go of this God. He's the God of heaven and earth." So it didn't matter if she would be rich or poor. Some people feel you come and serve the true God and He will make you rich. Ruth didn't think that way. What was in her mind was, it doesn't matter if I am picking up after servants to get food. I will not let go of this God, because He's the true God. So rich or poor. To her surprise, Boaz showed kindness to her. So while Ruth was picking up the leftovers, Boaz arrives on the scene. He notices this foreign girl and he shows kindness to her. So look at chapter 2 and verse 10. It says, "At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, 'Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? In the midst of an evil society, here was a good man.'" So considering the dangerous times that they were living in, Boaz protected her by telling her to stay in his field. So when Boaz said to Ruth, "Don't go anywhere else and glean," he was protecting her. So take a look at verse 8 and 9 of chapter 2. "So Boaz said to Ruth, 'My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you.'" And look at verse 22. "So Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the girls, because in someone else's field you might be harmed.'" So that itself will tell you the dangerous times of the Judges period. This is taking us back into the history of the Judges time. People did evil. Every man did as he saw fit in his own eyes. Everybody rejected the God who delivered them out of bondage from Egypt and gave them a promised land. No one wanted to recognize that. All rejected God. And that was the times that they were living in. So although Boaz had good people working for him, he still took every precaution. Take a look at chapter 2 and verse 9. And it says, "Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you." He had good men, but still he took every precaution because the times were evil. Ruth was very thankful to Boaz for his kindness. And when Ruth got home that day, she told her mother-in-law, Naomi, that she had gleaned in a field that belonged to a man by the name of Boaz. When Naomi heard this, she expressed thankfulness to God because she knew this man. She didn't know that Ruth was going to go to this particular field and glean there. But she was thankful to the Lord. Look at 2:20. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She first thought that God was punishing her, but now she realized that he was not. Naomi thought that God was punishing her. So let's compare chapter 1 and verse 13, 20 and 21. We will compare that to chapter 2 and verse 20. So 1:13 says, "Would you wait until they grow up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters." This is Naomi speaking to her daughters-in-law. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." So Naomi thought that God's hand was against her. Now look at verses 20 and 21. "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me, and the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Now let's compare that to chapter 2 and verse 20. And it says, "The Lord bless him." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "He has not stopped showing kindness to the living and the dead." It was a change of mind and a change of heart on the part of Naomi. She's changed that idea where the Lord has been bitter to me. Now she said, the Lord has never stopped showing kindness to the living and the dead. I'm the one that's alive. My husband Elimelech is dead. But God has never stopped showing his kindness. The limitation of human understanding does not alter the providence of God. This is the lesson that we need to get in the book of Ruth. The providence of God is beyond human limitations. So we'll go back to chapter 2 and verse 3. "She went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out," so you can see right there, she never planned to go to this particular field. She just happened to go to one of the fields. "As it turned out, She found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz. She didn't even know who Boaz was. Who was one of the clans of Elimelech. God rules and sustains even when humans don't have a clue of what's going on. Some believe that God will only bless when they fast and pray. But they have to remember the providence of God, because they need to realize that God blesses even when they are fast asleep. When they are fast aan die slaap. You verstaan? People don't know what's going on, but God is still taking care of the situation. His knowledge is limitless. Our knowledge is limited. Boaz happened to be a kinsman redeemer. Ruth didn't know that. Was that by chance, or was that by God's providence? Naomi remembered the law concerning the kinsman redeemer, which meant the hope of a new life. So when you think of a kinsman redeemer, in the time of these Israelites, it was a hope of a new life. It was saving life. But without claiming a lawful right, she submitted to the mercy of the kinsman redeemer. Naomi didn't say, I know the law these are some laws on a kinsman redeemer, so I want to stand up for my rights and get the kinsman redeemer to save us. No, she didn't do that. She submitted to the mercy of the kinsman redeemer. She let him decide, although she knew the law. The law of the kinsman redeemer was to save a family from losing their family name. The family name was very important in Israel, by the way. It's more important than our family name right now. I mean, if we have kids and they don't carry the family name, it doesn't really matter. Why did it matter in Israel, though? If you lost your family name, you lost your property in the promised land. You'll be living on someone else's property, and they could kick you out any time. So the Redeemer has to do with saving the family from losing the family name and the piece of property on the promised land. It's important for us to understand that, because Ruth doesn't explain anything about the laws of a kinsman redeemer. So we have to go back to the books that we've covered already. Leviticus, Deuteronomy. Keeping the Bible consecutively, or understanding it consecutively. You can't study the New Testament and then come back and try to understand the book of Ruth. You'll never get it. So you've got to study from Genesis all the way up to the book of Joshua. So let's take a look at Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 25. We'll look at verse 25, 26, 27, and 28 of Leviticus 25. And it says, if one of your countrymen becomes poor and sells some of his property, his nearest relative is to come and redeem what his countryman has sold. So you look at the word redeem, that's the key word there. If, however, a man has no one to redeem it for him, but he himself prospers and acquires sufficient means to redeem it, he is to determine the value of the years since he sold it and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it. He can then go back to his own property. But if he does not acquire the means to repay him, what he sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee. Now you know all about the year of Jubilee. You also know about the sabbatical year. We've covered all that in the book of Leviticus. It will return in the Jubilee, and he can go back to his own property. That gives us some information about the kinsman redeemer. So now turn to Deuteronomy chapter 25 and verse 5 and 6. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son that she bears shall carry the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. Now you know why that the Israelites were not allowed to marry too far away in the family or from other tribes, because they lose the property. So they had to keep the family name and in the clan so that they protect their own property. Now, if Ruth had not returned with Naomi, Elimelech's lane would have been wiped out and the family property would have been lost forever. Imagine if Ruth said to Naomi, okay, fine, I'll stay in Moab. You can go back by yourself. She would not have been able to protect the property. So Ruth did not understand any of the Israelite law, by the way. What did Ruth know about Israelite law? She didn't know about God's laws in the book of Leviticus, in the Pentateuch. This is the providence of God through his divine rulership. And you know the providence of God is not only for the Israelites, but also for the other nations. Because God knew Ruth, she was not an Israelite. God cared for her. Now, if a kinsman redeemer chooses to buy the property and marry Ruth, their first son will carry the family name, and the property stays in the family of Elimelech. God rules over the affairs of men, but he is not limited to human limitations. He is able to care for the living and the dead, whether they know it or not. How about that? Some people feel only if I fast and pray, the Lord will take care of me and bless me. What about the dead? Are they fasting and praying for the Lord to take care of them? They did. But you know what God does? He still takes care of the dead as well, because he's protecting the property. By the way, God will raise the dead. We studied that in Genesis because Abraham believed that God can raise the dead when he was going to sacrifice his son. He is able to care for the living and the dead. He knows everything and he governs everything in his own good, for his own good purpose. We can't control the blessings of the Lord, by the way, folks. You can't control the blessings of the Lord. You can't say, if I am good, the Lord will bless me. So the amount of blessings I need, it depends on how I act. Our understanding is limited. There are things that we don't know about. God already knows and he takes care of it. That's what the providence of God is about. It's beyond us. It's beyond our human limitations. So let's take a look at chapter 3. Hope through the kinsman redeemer. As Naomi desired for Ruth to settle down with her husband and build a home, she thought of no one better than Boaz, the kinsman redeemer. So if you want to think of Naomi as a matchmaker, that's fine. Boaz was a respectable person. He was a good man. So she was doing a good matchmaking. Take a look at chapter 2 of Ruth and verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing, whose name was Boaz. So he was a good man. And Ruth also gained the respect of everyone. So when people came to know Ruth, they all respected her. How do we know that? Look at chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of what? Noble character. So Ruth proved to be a good person as well. Naomi guided Ruth as to how to approach Boaz in a modest way. So ladies, if you want to find a man and you think that he's a good guy and you want to get married to, I don't know if you want to take Naomi's advice though. These two would be perfect for each other, Boaz and Ruth. Naomi knew it. Ruth proved to be noble in character. And Boaz proved to be different from the evil society of his time. All the men around him were evil, but he proved to be a good man. He didn't let the evil affect him. Sometimes you feel, I've got children growing up, but it's in a terrible society. These children are going to become bad. No, they don't have to. They can still grow up in an evil society and be good people worshipping the true God. While the Israelites generally ignored the word of God, yes, their problem, they ignored the word of God. Boaz remained knowledgeable of the scriptures and loyal to God. You see, Boaz knew the scriptures. Naomi knew the scriptures. Boaz also knew the scriptures. That's what made them different from all the other Israelites. Take a look at chapter 3 and verses 12 and 13. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. So Boaz was very honest. He didn't just jump to it and say, I am the kinsman redeemer. No, there's another one who's nearer than I am. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until the morning. This is what made him different to the other Israelites. Can you imagine when everyone did as he saw fit in his own eyes? Boaz still decided that he wants to obey the law. He still stayed true to God. His kindness glorified God's righteousness. Boaz did not make his own rules like all the other Israelites, but he followed God's requirements very carefully. He did not follow the trend of his time. And you know what the trend of the time was? You just have to look at Judges chapter 21, verse 25. And it says, in those days Israel had no king, everyone did as he saw fit. Boaz didn't do that. Here was a kinsman redeemer, closer than Boaz, to whom he yielded to. According to the law, in the midst of a chaotic nation, Boaz stayed true to the Lord's leadership. Even Naomi knew that Boaz was a God-fearing man. That's why she didn't mind if Ruth would marry Boaz, because he was a God-fearing man. So take a look at chapter 3 and verse 18. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. She knew Boaz. So let's take a look at chapter 4, the light of life through the offspring. So when you think everything is hopeless and I am finished, chapter 4 talks about the light of life through the offspring. So through Ruth, the kinsman redeemer, Naomi was able to see the light of life. Naomi thought that life was over for me. But it was not. The other kinsman redeemer followed the law only if it benefited him. So he didn't want to buy the land. He was a selfish man. It was typical of the times of the Judges period. I'll buy the land if it benefits me. His motive was to buy the property for selfish gain and not to save his fellow Israelite. When he was told that the property will not belong to him, he turned down the sale. That was the closer kinsman redeemer. Lawlessness and selfishness characterized the Israelites of that time. And when the first kinsman redeemer refused to buy, then Boaz took the opportunity to redeem. Boaz says he's got the first opportunity, according to the law. And the woman gave glory to God and said to Naomi that the Lord has not left her without a kinsman redeemer. It's the woman of the town. Chapter 4 and verse 14. The woman said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. May he become famous throughout Israel. The property would belong to the first son. But Boaz didn't worry about that. That the land was going to go back. He was a true kinsman redeemer. The property would belong to the first son who would carry the family name, and the inheritance remains within the family of Elimelech. Elimelech was dead, but his property is still protected. Boaz respected the Lord, he obeyed the scriptures, he cared for his servants, and he helped his fellow citizens. Respect for the Lord results in a selfless lifestyle. Because Boaz respected the Lord, he even took care of his workers, his servants. And the elders blessed the offspring of Boaz and Ruth. Before he was even born, they got married. Now Ruth is with child, and here are the people, the elders. They bless the offspring. He's not even born yet. Chapter 4 and verse 11 and 12. Then the elders and all those at the gate said, We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephratah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman. May your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. By the way, Tamar was not even an Israelite. If you go back into the history of the Israelites or the family of Jacob, and Ruth was not an Israelite. Then the woman blessed Naomi with longevity of life. Look at verse 15. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. Her husband died, her sons died. She told her daughter-in-laws to go back to Moab because she thought, my life is over. But look at the blessing. The woman said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman. And verse 15 says, He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. So when Naomi thought of life, that life was over, she started to realize that with God, it was not over. It was just starting. Life was just beginning for Naomi. It wasn't over. It looked like it was over for her. Even we would sometimes feel that way. Everything has come to an end. But to God, I am just getting started with you. Look at verse 16 and 17. Then Naomi took the child. Isn't that a sustenance of life? Naomi took the child, laid him on her lap, and cared for him. It's the baby. Verse 17 says, The woman living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. A woman that thought life was over was suddenly learning to understand that God was giving her longevity of life. She was transformed. Obed means worshipper rather than Mahlon and Kilian. The birth of a child brought hope and transformation, not only to the family of Elimelech, but also to the Moabite girl. Transformation to a Moabite girl. So in conclusions, what can we say of the book of Ruth? There's some tough lessons in this book. There are many today who claim to be under the grace of God and will promote the sow the seed philosophy. Have you heard that? Sow the seed and you will get benefits. They claim to be under the grace of God. They tell people that if they sow the seed, then they will reap lots of benefits. But this is a conditional philosophy, because Naomi and Ruth did not sow any seed, yet they reaped a harvest greater than all the seed sowers in Israel. What seed did they plant? Nothing. They were taken care of through God's providence. So exactly what are many of the modern day, I would say, gambling theologians doing? Trying to restrict God's generosity by telling people that they will only reap what they sow? Are these theologians trying to restrict God's generosity? If you make the bed, you will sleep on it. Is that what God's providence is about? Naomi didn't sow any seed, neither did Ruth sow any seed. But Boaz was generous towards them because God was being generous towards them. Ruth became the great grandmother of David. She didn't sow any seed. You know that David is the greatest king that Israel ever had. Israel's greatest king, through whose family line, and here's what's even greater, the offspring that's promised in Genesis 3:15 was going to be born through this family line. And Ruth was a Moabite. This book portrays Jesus Christ as our kinsman redeemer. He provides what we do not sow. Yes, biblical theology, folks. Jesus Christ, who is our kinsman redeemer, provides what we don't earn, what we don't sow, in His providence. The Redeemer is all about saving those who have lost everything, and not about reaping what you sow. They did not they did not sow, but they reaped a harvest. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Father, we are grateful for the great lesson that we can learn in the book of Ruth. Greater than individuals being faithful, we see your providence beyond the understanding and the limitations of humans. But we are grateful, Lord, because you are gracious and you are merciful, and you know how to take care without even us knowing about it. We are grateful for the lesson that we can learn, and as we continue further, we ask that you give us deeper understanding in Jesus' name.